Kia ora, talofa, namaste, haere and welcome to this week's episode of the Niche Cast. We're from the Niche Case, the niche-case.com, where you can read about some Aotearoa sporting matters live on the website right now. Got that Kiwi-NRL spotlight on Shaun Johnson. And shout out to the subscriber podcast and all those who support us directly through Patreon and paid Substack subscriptions, because we did do a deep dive into Shaun Johnson's career and if this is his best season. So that Kiwi-NRL Spotlight is live on the website. Got a Warriors versus Tigers preview live on the website. Also got the Flying Kiwis weekly yarn. That is live on the website right now. And there is that extra podcast, the subscriber podcast, for those who do support the Niche Case directly on Patreon and Substack. We also talked about some Flying Kiwis, if I do remember correctly, in that subscriber podcast. So check that out. It's on the Patreon feed. It's on the paid Substack feed as well. It's always there for you, and we do appreciate the support of all the Patreon and paid Substack whānau. Big up to you. That is the easiest way to support the Niche Case directly as well. So if you do want to give back to the Niche Case and basically put some fuel in our tanks, head on over to Patreon or Substack, sign up, and that keeps the Niche Case flowing, rocking and rolling. But you don't have to. You can just check out the website, theniche-case.com. You can subscribe on YouTube. Check us out on Twitter, X, and Instagram as well. Whatever your buzz is, we're always here representing Aotearoa to the fullest. Deluxe. And of course, we love Aotearoa sport. Also, shout out to the Substack newsletter that goes out every Monday and Friday, full of Aotearoa sporting notes and nuggets. I'm seeing a lot of interesting selections in the New South Wales Cup, Queensland Cup, under-21s in New South Wales and Queensland. Probably touch on those for the email newsletter tomorrow. We might have a bit of Black Sticks hockey review because they play tonight. We'll talk about in a second. That might appear. Also might have, I'll do an NRL Waine preview tomorrow for the website, the niche-case.com, so that won't appear in the newsletter, but I will be doing a lot of rugby league, as is always the case in the newsletter. Nico the Wildcard never really knows what he's going to write for the email newsletter when we do check in on a Thursday, but we'll try once again. What do you got?
Well, I have a sneaking suspicion there might be a bit of Wellington Phoenix squad building, particularly around that women's team, as they've signed their first ever import, and bit of news surrounding that. And what do you think? There might be some Flying Kiwis in there as well. Just dangle that carrot out there too.
That is where you can get all the links to our website, the latest things we've written, as well as all the podcast information in our newsletter twice a week, every Monday and Friday. Sign up via Substack, and then there is that option to go to a paid Substack subscription, get the extra podcasts, and support us directly as well. Basically getting a whole lot of Niche Case Aotearoa sporting funk sent straight to you twice a week. Honkadori, happy days, ka pai. Let's get a bit of mindfulness before we crack on to a monster podcast.
Mindfulness. Well, today I have a little dose here from Arthur Mackin, who said, "In every grain of wheat there lies hidden the soul of a star." Don't normally think about wheat in that way, when you're eating your Wheat Bix or whatever, but you know.
Yeah, I don't know how you get the connection between the stars and the wheat, although things only grow at the ground level because of what's happening beyond our planet. You know, the sun powers the ground, the things growing on the ground, and the kumara harvest, the moon, the full moon, when to harvest, when not to harvest, how things grow, how things sprout. But I don't think that's got anything to do with your specific mindfulness.
I mean, I think it does. I think that's a valid point. I also think that I would add clearly the metaphorical version of that, of just like, don't judge things on their appearances. Everything could, the potential that things have, we don't expect it, that kind of stuff. And then also, I guess, on a grand scale, because I don't know. Maybe this is just in my head because I watched that Oppenheimer movie on the weekend. But everything is made up of atoms. The same atoms that are in that wheat might have been a star 20 billion years ago or something like that. It's same atoms in ourselves are also potentially coming out of, well, they came out of space once upon a time, right? Because if you go back far enough, this stuff is extremely trippy and borderline almost psychotic to think about on that level. But the grain of the grain of wheat lies hidden the soul of the star.
We're getting astral. We're getting crazy with the mindfulness there. But it is to say, big up to yourself, because you're probably made up of the same atoms as the stars, as the beautiful
we are stardust.
Trees and plants that grow around us, all the beings that are here with us right now. Big up to them, big up to yourself. Let's get into some Aotearoa sport. And it's a weekend of Black Sticks hockey in Whangarei. There's Oceania Cup hockey between the Black Sticks and Australia. Aotearoa versus Australia. Winner gets automatic Olympic qualification. The loser has to go to a qualification tournament early next year, to get into the Paris Olympics. And for any hockey fans, this will be a really interesting couple of days of Black Sticks hockey. I do believe these games are being broadcast on TVNZ Plus, which is it's making waves as far as broadcasting some of these Aotearoa sporting matters. They're all going to be on demand live on TVNZ Plus, so you can check that out for Black Sticks hockey fans. Really important, because the Black Sticks men were relegated out of the Pro League. Shout out. And the women pulled themselves out of the Pro League for a variety of reasons, one of which was to focus on Olympic qualification. And that, as we've talked plenty about over the last few years, has been in alignment with the general demise of New Zealand hockey. Both of the teams, the latest update, the most notable significant checkpoint was the Commonwealth Games, in which neither team won a medal for basically the first time ever. And now they're in a qualification battle with Australia in the Oceania Cup, and Australia is really, really, really good at hockey. The men more so than the women. And I was thinking it is in Whangarei, and it's been a big week for Whangarei with the Dylan Brown and Wiremu Greg coming back into that Eels team. So shout out to Northland Sport. Obviously got the Taniwha in action in the NPC. Shout out to them, Northland Rugby. Let me spin it this way. I'm curious to see what happens here. Because Australia's really good at hockey. Black Sticks hockey has been decreasing, and the latest update with their Pro League campaign definitely tells that story. It's not the end of the world if they lose to Australia in the Oceania Cup, because they can go through that qualification tournament. But even then, it's no certainty that New Zealand qualifies through those qualification tournaments right now, given the state of New Zealand hockey, none of which would matter if the Black Sticks actually managed to defeat Australia. It is both teams have far stronger squads with players available and like a focus on qualification for the Olympics. So you've got a lot of returning players who were playing professionally in Europe, players who had been retired or injured or taken a break because they needed to work full-time jobs and whatnot. Those players are back in the mix to help get New Zealand into the Olympics. But Australia's really good. And I don't know how these teams are going to defeat Australia, but we'll give them a chance in this Oceania Cup. 3 games. First match day is today, Thursday, the 10th of August. They play 5 o'clock, 7 o'clock, and then you've got double headers again on Saturday and Sunday. So we'll see what happens here. There is another chance for Olympic qualification in that tournament in January next year. I don't know what's going to happen, but we'll keep track of it. I'll be writing about those first 2 games tonight in tomorrow's email newsletter, so check out that. Do you have any thoughts about hockey?
I mean, I have some thoughts on Northland Sport. I have seen these ones advertised as a billboard around near the stadium, so I did know that was coming up, which is more than I can say about when there was a Tauihi game there a couple of weeks ago and nobody said anything and I had no idea. I didn't realize until saw the thing and they're like, coming live from Whangarei. And I'm like, well, if you bloody told me, I might have gone to it. Should I go to the hockey? I don't have a game this. It's a cup weekend in the football, so we don't have a game because we've already been knocked out. So is it worth popping a line to any of these?
I think any time to watch international hockey is probably worth it, but especially if you're going to watch the Aussies. The Aussie men
Right.
consistently an elite world-class team, and that flows on from what you were saying. Maybe in the subscriber podcast, you've got this big idea about latching onto Australian sport, and that's, it's easy to see how that is beneficial in the NRL. We've also seen it be beneficial in football as well as basketball, and how Australia and their competitions, their development kind of system and process is highly beneficial to New Zealand. Same thing applies in hockey, although there isn't much crossover. So New Zealand isn't making most of the fact that one of the best hockey nations is Australia right there. Let's latch onto them. Let's use them to our own benefit. That doesn't really happen. That is to say, Australia's really good at hockey. So if you do want to watch some good sport and you do want to watch hockey, like genuine world-class hockey players and a world-class team, specifically the Australian men, and I think the women's game is going to be pretty even because the Australian women aren't quite as good as the Australian men, but top level sport, you can't go wrong. It's always fun to watch. We also had some Blackcaps news come out recently, although the news is quite similar to what the general vibe is for the Blackcaps right now. We all know the Blackcaps are preparing for a World Cup. That's the big Donny. That's the big thing coming up. We've got a All Blacks World Cup. We've got a Rugby World Cup with the All Blacks. We've got a Cricket World Cup also to finish this year. But the news and the information we're being delivered about the Blackcaps is incredibly confusing. It's all over the show. Players are available here, they're not available there, they're going to do this, some players can't do that, and then this player's going to go here, then that player's going to go there. It's all very confusing, but essentially seems like Kane Williamson his chances of being at that World Cup continue to increase, which is beautiful. And as we expected, Trent Boult and Kyle Jamieson are definitely in the mix for the World Cup. We always kind of felt like Trent Boult would be available because that's his prerogative, is to play the major tournaments and to do whatever he wants to do. He's earned that right. Kyle Jamieson, supreme X-factor, unique bowling talent. As long as he's healthy and he's playing cricket, he should be in a top 15 Blackcaps kind of squad setup, which he is. As far as what I do want to highlight this as well. So the Blackcaps, they're going to be playing, a Blackcaps squad. How about that? A Blackcaps squad is going to be playing against the UAE in Dubai. That starts next week, next Thursday, 3 games. A week later, you've got a New Zealand A team that's going to be traveling to Australia. And that starts just before the Blackcaps play against England in some T20s. And then I think we've also got some ODIs there. I'm curious, and this is where my real intrigue and funk is, who's in that New Zealand A squad? Because every other cricketer, there's basically 25 to 30 lads named in the various Blackcap squads. So who are the players who are going to be selected for the New Zealand A team to go to Australia? Remember, last summer finished with Australia coming to New Zealand for a couple of 4 days between the two A teams. And, there we go. That's the theme of the podcast. Because what are New Zealand cricket doing here? At the end of last summer and the start of this summer, they have New Zealand versus Australia A. And Australia is a really good cricketing nation, so I'd think for the development of New Zealand cricket, we should be getting as many A games as possible against Australia. Like that seems like a really smart development, latching onto the Australia system as well. But I am curious who is selected in that squad, and I'm waiting to see when that news drops. I find, especially that, the A section of the next couple of months will be really interesting, far more interesting than some of the T20 cricket specifically. And then there is a bit of a funneling bottleneck process with the ODI series against England, which does seem to have a fairly strong Blackcaps ODI World Cup-y squad. The only change that we discussed prior to the recording, Ish Sodhi is not in the ODI squad to face England. Rachin Ravindra is. As far as building a World Cup squad, I think it's a like for like, in for out. Rachin Ravindra drops out, Ish Sodhi drops in. Ish Sodhi's been very busy, so he will return to New Zealand for a couple of weeks before playing some T20 cricket. I think he is in the T20 series for England. Yes. So that's the menu of Blackcaps cricket. Do you have any thoughts about the menu before I do drop some World Cup squad thoughts?
Well, when was the last time the Blackcaps played?
Oh, I've got no idea.
Because we've had a lot of cricket on TV, but it's all been Ashes stuff, and that frankly did get a bit tiresome after a while. You know, it was very interesting to start with because he had this big clash of styles and whatever, and then it just kept going and kept going and kept going. So I'm actually like, it's not an important point, but I'm actually trying to think when the last time the Blackcaps played, and I can't think what it was off the top of my head. So it will be nice to have them back in action. But it is a little bit of a soft open for a long summer, isn't it?
It's just the development tour. Like, it's just like, let's get these lads playing as much cricket, and it's going to be very interesting because we do have a general World Cup squad. This is my kind of top tier: Devon Conway, Finn Allen, Kane Williamson, Will Young, Daryl Mitchell, Tom Latham, Glenn Phillips, Mitchell Santner, Ish Sodhi, Tim Southey, Trent Boult, Matt Henry, Kyle Jamieson. That's 13 players. We do think a World Cup squad's going to be 15 players. I think Lockie Ferguson is highly likely to be in a World Cup squad. That's 14 players. Then we're looking for one player. Oh, the dude I forgot was Tom Blundell, wicket-keeping cover. So if we have Tom Blundell in the World Cup squad, I don't think Blundell was named. Let me do a Control F for Blundell. He's not there. So I think Tom Blundell is a bit of an interesting lad as far as World Cup squad selection goes because he is a specialist wicketkeeper. If I've got Ferguson and Blundell in that squad together, that's 15. You could alternatively get Rachin Ravindra ahead of one of those players. I don't think Adam Milne's likely to be selected ahead of like Ferguson or a spinner in Ravindra. Henry Nicholls offers batting cover. Jimmy Neesham and Mark Chapman are kind of those middle order, all-roundery type of players. So do you have any thoughts? And like, this is interesting because these players on the fringe, they will be the players to watch out for as we view the next couple of months holistically. Who's scored the most runs? Who's taken the most wickets? If it is Lockie Ferguson, that's fantastic for him. If Rachin Ravindra's on fire, he might enter the equation. Tom Blundell's not there, so who knows? Maybe Mark Chapman just has his quintessential epic T20 knocks and everyone thinks he should be in the ODI team and then he doesn't take his chance. Because it was the last time we saw the Blackcaps was that weird series in, I think it was Pakistan, where they took that kind of development leg. So if I've named 13 players there, and I won't repeat them because I think you know who they are. 13 players, and then we're trying to fit in two more. Henry Nicholls, Adam Milne, Lockie Ferguson, Rachin Ravindra, Jimmy Neesham, Mark Chapman, Tom Blundell. Who are your two players?
Yeah, well, I would take Ferguson, and I I guess the other aspect of this is it would have been Michael Bracewell would have been one of those guys, but of course he's out injured. So in that case, I suspect the old like for like with Ravinja might not be out of the question. Although I kind of think for a tournament you want to have another wicket keeper going around. They do have a lot of guys who can keep. Like they might just decide, Tom Latham is their number one ODI wicket keeper, and they might just say, well, Devon Conway's our backup. He can do a job. Um, and in that case, I can understand the thinking. Tom Blundell does also cover batting basically from 1 through 7. So it's not like he's only there to be a specialist gloveman. He's going to fill in with the bat if needed as well, and probably do a pretty good job of it. But I don't know, a World Cup in India, I think I would lean towards Ravinja, but I wouldn't want to lock that in until I see how he goes over the next month or two of some of these other sort of scattergun series.
So you're leaning towards a spinning bowler as opposed to, well, you've already got Ferguson, so that kind of covers the pace aspect. No Henry Nicholls? No Mark Chapman?
Yeah, I mean, you had Kane Williamson in the 13A.
Correct.
So if he's injured, I think that's when you start working back into some of the options like Nicholls or Chapman, who, again, like both of those two guys, Nicholls has opened plenty in World Cups. Well, I mean, in ODI cricket, but he actually opened at the last World Cup as well. He top scored in the final, so that was nice for him. And Chapman is a middle order blaster, and I think also Neesham would have to be in strong consideration at that point as well. In fact, Neesham might also nudge ahead of Ravinja for the all rounder thing. And the other factor is, can Lockie Ferguson, will he still be fit? And probably same with Jamison. Like, will they still be fit in 2 months' time when the World Cup comes up as well? As not something to be discounted given their histories. But I think the Blackcaps are overall. A lot of this does depend on how Williamson tracks, because I'm still, as much as they say like he's not out of it, he's, everything's progressing nicely. It's still like, yes, but it is, it is a rather serious injury to come back from, and just being able to run doesn't necessarily mean prime batting capabilities either. But I think one thing that works in his favor there is it's a cricket World Cup, which means it's like a month long plus, and the Blackcaps are expected to go deep. So, he doesn't have to play the first few weeks, even if you touch and go, you can sort of ease him up. Do like Sam Kerr with the Aussie football team at the moment, she's injured, but we're just going to get through the group stage without her and then ease her in once we hit the knockouts, as they've been doing. So, I think overall the Blackcaps are like, I remember before the last World Cup, we didn't even know who was going to be opening the batting. Like, was it going to be Munro? Was it going to be Nicholls? Then it was one, then the other, and then they went back to Munro, and then they dropped him midway through and went with Nicholls. Like there were decisions like that where it didn't feel like they knew. Like they were still trying to figure this out. Here, there's still a couple spots to figure out, but they're like 14 and 15 on the list. They seem pretty stable, pretty locked in for the majority of their good dudes, which will encompass all of their starting 11 as well. Their first choice starting 11, they pretty much know what that is. Maybe one or two options where you might change it depending on conditions, like the extra spinner or whatever, but they know who that's going to be as well. Like, it's a nice stable position to be in leading into a World Cup.
And Blundell isn't in any squad. So did
he retire? Or?
I don't know. Like maybe he just knows he's already in the World Cup squad, so he doesn't need to worry. The T20 squad to play UAE, which is starting next week, there is Mark Chapman is in that squad, Kyle Jamison's in that squad, Neesham's in that squad, Santner is in that squad, and Will Young, obviously Ravindra as well. So those are the main dudes. Like Santner's already going to be there. Will Young, Neesham, even McConchy. Like if McConchy catches fire, he could be a better player than Rachin Ravindra. He's in the squad. So there are some players in that T20 squad to play UAE who have World Cup competition up for grabs. There's also that strong development angle with Ashok in there, Foxcroft in there, Lister's in there, Tickner's back in, and he's not really a development, but There are some young players in that squad to watch out for as well. But as I said earlier, it's best viewed in a very holistic sense. Like, who are the dudes who have scored lots of runs? Who are the dudes who have taken lots of wickets and bowled the most overs and, faced the most deliveries with the highest strike rates? All that stuff taken over a large sample size will be the most interesting aspect. The Warriors take on the Tigers in Hamilton. Home game for the Tigers. Shout out to the Tigers, because it's not going to be many Tigers fans at that game. So good for them. One of the only kind of Australian entities to do something in service of the Warriors after the pandemic. And this is interesting because that game in the Gold Coast, what did I tweet here? It was the second biggest crowd the Gold Coast have had this season. And it was a home game for the Titans, but it was bolstered by a lot of Warriors folk in the Cbus Super Stadium. And that's going to be the same case, obviously, for a Tigers home game in Hamilton. So the Warriors are going to bolster a couple of other teams' home games and the crowd numbers there. Also, this fits into a nice run of NRL-ish games outside of Auckland. So I think you're going to get between 15 and 20,000, maybe over 20,000 at the Hamilton Stadium. All-Star game, Māoris versus Indigenous Australians. That was 17,600. Storm trial in Christchurch earlier this year between the Warriors and the Storm was 12,000. You had a Warriors versus Knights in Wellington. That was 16,600. And Warriors versus Broncos in Napier, that was 16,000 people. So I do think you're going to get between 15 and 20,000 for that game. 90% will be Warriors fans. So shout out to the Tigers for trying really hard there. And of course, the Tigers aren't very good. The Tigers are last on the NRL ladder. They have conceded 536 points. They've scored 319 points. And it's a bit of a strange thing to wrap your head around, because the Warriors are one of the best defensive teams in the NRL. They are a very good tackling team. So they have made a lot of tackles. And this is an interesting one, because you do need to figure out like what this means. Essentially what the Warriors do is they like to tackle, and they're willing to tackle a lot. They are second for the total tackles made, so they tackle a lot, but they are also 14th for missed tackles, and they are 16th for ineffective tackles. So the Warriors do a lot of tackling. Jeepers creepers. But they miss very few tackles, and they have very few ineffective tackles. The Tigers are actually a good tackling team as well. They're 17th for missed tackles and 17th for ineffective tackles, but they don't do a lot of tackling, and they also concede a lot of points. So they are 13th for total tackles made, and they are also, one of the worst defensive teams in the competition this year as far as conceding points goes. So it's a interesting little statistic matchup, and I don't want to cling to the stats too much, because as we saw last week, Warriors versus Titans, I did kind of preview it from a statistical perspective, none of which really applied in the game, because the Titans were just fizzed up to play footy and the Warriors were battling some of the Gold Coast energy. Like, whether it was a bit of heat, whether it was a bit of sickness, the Warriors were off the pace, and a lot of, I've said a few times, Sean Johnson just looked crook. So I am kind of weighing up, balancing those two things. Like, there is a very interesting statistical battle here with the Titans, with the Warriors and the Tigers, where the Warriors, they're one of the leading tackling teams as far as making tackles and missing few tackles, with the very few ineffective tackles. And they're also, I think they're top 4 for points conceded, like top 4 defense. So that all says the Warriors are a good defensive team. And these are very basic stats. We're not doing in like advanced analytics here. Like, it's not your your XG stats that you use for football, let alone any of the stats that we do get for some of the basketball, NBA stuff, and so on. These are very basic metrics. Points conceded, tackles made, missed tackles, and a slightly more airy-fairy one of ineffective tackles. Like, who's to say what an ineffective tackle is? But all of those things are in the Warriors' favor. Whereas the Tigers, they are the best team for missed tackles and ineffective tackles. They have the fewest missed tackles and the fewest ineffective tackles. But they also concede, not the worst, but they're one of the worst defensive teams as far as points conceded and wins go. And another little interesting statistical thing here is that the Warriors are one of the best defensive teams, and the Tigers are also one of the worst attacking teams. So the Tigers don't score points. They don't score tries. They're not very good for line breaks, and they're not very good as far as points scored goes, which I don't know. Well, this is a story of 2023. Like, there is this perception of the Warriors. They're a great attacking team, razzle dazzle, all those kind of racial stereotypes that everyone has about the Warriors. But right now, they're a good defensive team, and they're a good attacking team, and they're a good team. They're just an all-round good NRL team, and they come up against the Tigers outfit that is all right at a few of those metrics, but they are also the worst team in the NRL. So it's going to be a fascinating matchup. Taine Tuaupiki is at fullback for the Warriors, replacing Shans Nickel-Kroekstar. And I wrote this morning for my preview that Taine Tuaupiki is an absolute live wire. He only played 63 minutes against the Titans, but he had like 6 tackle busts, 150 odd meters. Like, that is what Taine Tuaupiki does. And even the matchup between Taine Tuaupiki and Jahream Buller, Taine Tuaupiki is going to be a live wire in the same sense that Jahream Buller will be. And I think playing for a better team, Taine Tuaupiki might be the better fullback in this game as well.
Yeah, there's two different ways that can go, isn't it? When you're a team that makes a lot of tackles, that either says that you're really good at absorbing pressure and withstanding what other teams, like you don't break, you can defend on your goal line for 2 or 3 sets in a row or whatever, or and then get away with it without conceding points, and then go up the other end and score yourself, or what? And then there's the version of we make lots of tackles because we're always defending. Like we defend on our goal line a couple sets, then they still score, and then they're back inside our 20 2 minutes later, running it up from the kickoff or whatever, line break. Here we go. You sort of got two versions, like both of those extremes there, don't you, with the Tigers and the Warriors, and that I guess in the Warriors case, it is like a stat that is put in extra context when you also look at the fact that they have been really quite good as an attacking team, particularly in the second half of the season, where both of those things, good attacking team, good defending team, good team. Like that's we're talking about not using complicated metrics. That's 1 + 1 = 2 right there. If you're a good attacking team and a good defensive team, you are a good team.
Definitely. I always like to just highlight the weakness that you want to target in the opposition, especially when covering the Warriors. Because when I do get into previewing NRL games, it is a Kiwi-NRL and it is for finals footy, so you don't really get to really highlight and pinpoint the opposition weakness. For the Tigers, that opposition weakness is Luke Brooks defending. The 2 players for the most missed tackles are Luke Brooks and Api Koroisau. Koroisau defends in the middle, makes a lot of tackles, misses a lot of tackles. That seems logical. It's also hard to target him when he's defending in the middle with some big bodies around him. You can target him by running at him a lot, and that's why he misses a lot of tackles. He makes a lot of tackles because he is getting targeted in the middle. But when we're thinking about the Warriors' strength and how they play their footy, Luke Brooks defending on there, I think he's left edge for the Tigers. And what was I saying earlier in the week about Sean Johnson for our subscriber podcast? He's basically tackling like Dylan Brown right now. I think I remember off the top of my head, it was 92.2% efficiency. Oh, 300 plus tackles, like 350 odd tackles. Luke Brooks has made 270 tackles at a percent of efficiency of 80.1. So like Luke Brooks isn't the best tackler. Let's just say that. And that's where the Warriors going to be sending a lot of shape, a lot of big bodies. Marata Niukore is going to be running at Luke Brooks, but he might not get the footy because Luke Brooks has to bite on Marata Niukore. He has to absorb that decoy run just in case Niukore does get the footy and does trample all over Luke Brooks. Then that's going to open up opportunities outside him. So I do think, I don't know if my prediction of a great Adam Pompey game came to fruition against the Titans, but again, the Titans were disruptors in that game. And that is the way the Tigers can defeat the Warriors, if they are disruptors, if they do drag the Warriors down to their level. The Titans did that. They were niggly. They dragged them down to the Titans' level. But Pompey was still pretty good. Like, I liked what Pompey was doing, but he didn't get those situations where Rocco Berry and Adam Pompey got early ball out on the center channel one-on-one. Luke Brooks defending on that Tigers left edge, the Warriors right edge. I think it's going to be a Rocco Berry extravaganza at right center. Whether that's him passing to Watane Zalesniak, whether it's him one-on-one with who do we have? Asu Kepaoa might be defending at left center. He's from Auckland. Stafford Toa's from Auckland. So you've basically got Kiwi-NRL centers in this game. Adam Pompey, Rocco Berry for the Warriors, Stafford Toa and Asu Kepaoa, both from Auckland for the Tigers. Even like Isaiah Papali is probably defending that left edge spot alongside Brooks. But the thing is, it's not targeting Luke Brooks specifically. It's challenging the spaces around Luke Brooks. So yeah, Luke Brooks needs to make a tackle, but he also needs to bite on the decoy run, which opens up space out wide. He can't leave, like players around Luke Brooks can't leave him to tackle one-on-one. And that opens up spaces elsewhere, let alone Taine Tuaupiki, because if Taine Tuaupiki is playing the Shans Nickel Klookstar role, he's going to be popping up on the right edge. So the Warriors, as we've said all season, it's Sean Johnson in the middle forwards operating in that middle third with the passing. Then you've got Nickel Klokstad on the right. You've got Luke Metcalf out on the left. In theory, Taine Tuaupiki just replaces Nickel Klokstad floating out to that right edge. And suddenly you've got speed and zip with Taine Tuaupiki as opposed to the class and composure of Shans Nickel Klokstad. So that's a different challenge as well with Taine Tuaupiki at fullback. One other thing that I have noticed about the Warriors is it's not like the most thinking of how to frame it. It is the biggest change to the rotation. Because the season started with Tom Ale on the bench and Bunty Afoa playing the same role as starting prop. You go 20 minutes, then he subbed off for Dylan Walker, basically blows a gasket for the first 20 minutes, then he's off the field. Very simple role. And Tom Ale will come on during the middle stages of the game. He'll play 20 minutes, highly efficient, highly effective, running the footy, making his tackles. Recent weeks, that has changed with Mitchell Barnett as starting prop and Jazz Tavanga coming into the team. So now Bunty Afoa and Tom Ale are outside the top 17. So that leaves you with a bench of Walker, Tavanga, Sirinen, and Josh Curran. So before it was Afoa and Tom Ale in the top 17 together. Now, neither of them are in the top 17 together. Tom Ale, he's gone back to reserve grade. He's playing big minutes, like 56 minutes, 17 runs, that type of thing. And I'm curious to see if Bunty Afoa pops up for the New South Wales Cup team playing before this NRL game, because he can play that big role in New South Wales Cup as well to get his fitness up, make sure he's putting in big minutes, lots of effort to stay ready for his NRL appearances. And I'm curious to see how this rotation looks in the coming weeks as they get into finals footy, because I still think it's a bit matchup dependent. And I think it's like there are roles for all of these bench players. Jazz Tavanga, he's a mobile, aggressive middle forward. He's got a bit more mobility and aggression than Bunty Afoa. And I think that's the hole that Bunty Afoa has left. Dylan Walker, he comes on after 20 minutes, changes the whole game. We know what he does. We've seen it all season. Bailey Sirinen can cover hooker. That's why he's on the bench, because he covers a lot of different positions, specifically hooker, but he can play middle, he can play edge. Josh Curran, he comes on the right edge because Marata Niukore plays between 40 and 60 minutes. So he's not an 80-minute edge forward. So that's what I was saying about Sean Johnson. Sean Johnson's excellence, it features Marata Niukore and Josh Curran playing that edge forward position outside Sean Johnson. So each one of those bench players has a specific role and a reason why they're on the bench. But I think if you're coming up against a bigger, more robust forward pack, then you might see Bunty Afoa come in for Josh Curran, or, some sort of change. Although I don't think Niukore is a 80-minute player right now. He can play 80 minutes, but he seems to get injured or go the sin bin. Shout out, do poke fun at the Dragons. We did talk about the Francis Michael Molo sin bin. But even Marata Niukore in his epic moment with David Fifita behind me in the video, he is a walk-in sin bin. He is going to get sin binned at some point. Rightly or wrongly, he does get sin binned. And I think that's the reason why Josh Curran stays on that bench covering that position. But I do want to highlight this shift in the Warriors' rotation. Start of the season, Bunty Afoa starting prop, Tom Ale coming off the bench. That Jazz Tavanga wasn't really around. Mitchell Barnett was playing a different position. Now that has changed to Afoa's outside the top 17. Tom Ale's playing big minutes in reserve grade. I don't think that is a locked-in situation for the rest of the season. I think that is matchup dependent, and the Tigers forward pack, don't think they've dominated anyone this season. I don't think there's anyone to be scared of in their forward pack. They do have some big boppers, but I think the Warriors coming up against that Tigers forward pack, they want to play fast, they want to play skillful, they want to shift the footy, and there is enough oomph in the wingers. There's enough oomph in Whanua Blake, Mitchell Barnett, Tohu Harris, Niukore, and the speed of Dylan Walker and those type of players as well. I think you can still make meters, break tackles, get line breaks, and perform well with the slightly smaller forward pack. One last thing. There's this thing about Rocco Berry defending where he just swallows people. He's a very big dude. I think him and Pompey are surprisingly tall, big centers. But Rocco Berry, if you're close to Rocco Berry, he just swallows you. He swallowed David Fifita. I made a short of it on YouTube. If you get close to him, he just swallows you up, and he doesn't when you tackle someone in the NRL, you want to hit and stick, obviously, but it's also you can see how the MMA stuff comes into it, because in MMA, Israel Adesanya got a fight book against Sean Strickland coming up in a few months or two. That's happening as well. In MMA, when you take someone down, you want to be glued to them. You don't want to take them down and then slide off. You don't want to get on top of them and they're wiggling and you can't control them. When you grapple, you want to be stuck to them. That's what you see with Rocco Berry. When he tackles you, it's not like he tackles you, wraps you up, gets you down, and then slides off you. He tackles you, wraps you up, he's stuck to you, dominate the tackle, slow play the ball. I think all the Warriors do a good job of getting the player to their back, staying on top of them, slowing to play the ball down. But if you come within 2 meters of Rocco Berry, he's eating you up. And he's going to win that tackle. And it doesn't matter who you are, really. Because he did it to David Fifita. He's done it against other good centers. He was pretty good against Talakai in that win over the Sharks where he ran rampant. But he is a really solid defender. And it's that ability just to wrap someone up, shut them down, and then allow the middle forwards to smash the bloke on the next tackle.
And of course, the MMA comparison is not a wild one there either, is it? Because Kai Kara-France has been doing a lot of work with them this year and working on some of this stuff. And I'd imagine that's probably actually quite a direct link. The fact that those things look very similar. Looking at the table, the Warriors are on 32 points from 20 games. They didn't get the result they wanted. I think the Broncos won relatively handily, didn't they, last week against the Cowboys, I think it was. So Warriors still need Brisbane, who are 4 points ahead of them, to drop some points somewhere in order for them to finish second. But with they're 2 points ahead of Melbourne and Canberra and have a better points differential than both of them. So with the games that the Warriors have remaining, like, they shouldn't finish any lower than top four, really. Like, realistically, as if they continue, they've won four? Let me check that. They've won 4 in a row. And their next remaining 4 games are Tigers away, but basically Tigers at home. Then Manly at home, Warriors at home, and away to Redcliffe.
Well, you said Warriors at home.
Tigers. What did I say? Let me say that again then. It's Tigers in a technical away game. That's basically a home game. Then Manly and St. George at home, and then away to Redcliffe. So that's the actual of it. But Manly is still in the mix for top 8. Redcliffe are probably, like the Dolphins, I'd say they're about the lowest team that could still feasibly have a chance, but that's last round. So by then they're probably going to have been knocked out of contention by then, because they are, 4 points back with the worst differential of any of these other two. Or Roosters have a slightly worse points differential. There you go. But they have 2 more points. And the Roosters have a decent run-in, actually. I was looking at that before. The Roosters are playing a bunch of teams that are just around them on the ladder. Plus, I think they might also have the Tigers in there. They do. In fact, Redcliffe and Sydney Roosters play each other this very upcoming week. So I'd imagine whichever team loses that is quite unlikely to make top 8 from that point on. But all that considered, there is a possibility, I think, of outcomes where the Warriors' top 8 place will be confirmed with a win this week and other results going their way. It doesn't really matter, because that's just a technicality that's happening. If it's not this week, it's next week. If it's not next week, it doesn't matter. They're going to make top 8 from here. They should make top 4 from here. And they have a pretty cruisy run. And there is, I guess, that aspect of you're playing a bunch of teams from out of contention, then you got to go into a finals game. It's potentially a very big difference, especially for a team where a lot of those players haven't played finals footy before. But I don't know. I think a lot of these games have still had it's the NRL, right? So it's not like you get many easy beat games. If the big hidings in this competition often come unexpectedly. And like we were talking last week about the Warriors potentially going out there and putting on a bit of a real physical display against the Titans and really sort of ruffling them up. And you can argue they did that, but they did that in a different way to what we were sort of anticipating, with it. The Titans also very much brought that style of play themselves. So it did turn into a very sort of a grit and grindy kind of game, particularly when you're up against a team who's, had a send-off. It often changes tactics, and they're not going to play so expansively, and they're going to be difficult to break down in an ironic kind of way, even though they've got one less dude in the line. But, it's all very well poised for the Warriors right now, and they've gotten this position because of how well they've played up until this point, and they should be able to capitalize on this for at least a very good finish on the table, and you get yourself top 4. You're in a pretty handy place then, because you're going to get a more favorable matchup, not to mention home game kind of factors. Like the top 8 race right now, we might talk about this actually, is quite fascinating. But the Warriors, in a weird way, where we would have been talking about them being before the season, would have been talking about it being success for the Warriors to be in that top 8 conversation at this stage of the season. They're above it. Like they're above looking down on that top 8 race, which is, it's just if you told me this 6 months ago, I wouldn't have believed you, you know?
And it does feel good. It does
Yeah,
feel good not to be
savor it, you
stressing
know?
about the top eight, not to be stressing about this Titans game or the Tigers game or any of these games where it's like, oh, we need a win here, or we dropped this game,
Mm.
now we need to do this, now we need points differential. Because when the Warriors have cracked the top eight in the last like decade
The
or
one
so,
time in the last decade, yeah.
it has been stressful. Like it's been like, oh, points difference, oh, this we need to win these games in the last few games. Right now, praise Jar, nothing happens, but Warriors are cruising for a top four spot, and it does feel good to be kind of chilling, looking down, as you said. There are a lot of Kiwi-NRL funk in that battle for the top eight. Starting with, we'll go order through games being played. So tonight you've got the Seagulls versus Panthers. We know who the Panthers are. We know their Kiwi-NRL excellence. Raymond Tuaimalo Vainga has crept into the Seagulls team in recent weeks. He's a powerful winger from Marist and Kelston Boys High School in Auckland. So if the Seagulls, if they're trying to get into top eight, you're going to see Tuaimalo Vainga against the Panthers tonight, Thursday night. Watch out for him. The Sharks are also trying to crack top eight or stay in the top eight. They did have a win last week. I think that was against the Rabbitohs. And Mawene Hiroti played in that game on the wing. And he's a depth outside back player. So if you do see an injury for the Sharks in the coming weeks, Mawene Hiroti is poised to plug a hole. And I think everyone loves KL Iro as a powerful kind of center outside back. But Mawene Hiroti has consistently been viewed higher than KL Iro in that Sharks setup. Mawene Hiroti is from Taranaki, was recruited by the Rabbitohs, now with the Sharks. But if the Sharks need a winger, if they need someone to come in for this game, for one game here, one game there, it's always been Mawene Hiroti. And I think a lot of people overlook him in favor of KL Iro. They are playing the Titans this weekend, so that'll be an interesting game, quite an important game, one would suggest, for the Sharks. You mentioned the Broncos as a certified top tier team, of which they are. Things are still pretty funky there for the Broncos from a Kiwi-NRL perspective because Dean Mariner's on the wing this week against the Eels and Jordan Ricky returns to edge forward. So that's bumped Xavier Willison out of the top 17. So that's the depth that the Broncos have in their forward pack. And again, if the Broncos need a winger, if they need a centre, Dean Mariner's there. And Dean Mariner, as I've said, him and Xavier Willison, they are playing NRL for any other team. Parramatta Eels, they're 9th right now, and they're chasing top 8 footy. Dejan Arcee's come in at centre. He scored a hat-trick playing number 6 for the Eels in New South Wales Cup last week. Now he's coming at centre. Curious to see how that goes for him. He'll be defending against either Katoni Staggs or Herbie Farnworth, the Herbal. None of that will be easy. And interestingly, like the Eels, Bailey Simonson was excellent at centre for a few weeks there. Now he shifts to the wing to make room for Dejan Arcee to come in at centre. So Arcee has basically commanded his opportunity. And as we know, the Northlanders are there for the Eels team. Rabbitohs, Dragons, not much doing there. Tigers, they're not very good. We'll probably lose to the Warriors. Then we get to that Roosters versus Dolphins game. Siwa Wong. We've got the Roosters, 12th, chasing finals footy, and doing so with Siwa Wong as their starting edge forward, playing 80 minutes, making the most tackles last week of all Roosters players. Roosters are a perennial top 8 team. And right now, the prestigious Roosters are trying to crack top 8 footy, and they've injected Siwa Wong. As we found out last week, he is a Burnham Manurewa Jr., and he is now starting edge forward for the Roosters. So if the Roosters are making a push, if they're there to win against the Dolphins, Siwa Wong's heavily involved, and we know the Kiwi-NRL Dolphins are stacked to the brim with talent. Isako Tafare, Wellington's Isaiah Katoa is there, the Bromwich brothers, Marshall King, Connolly Lemuelu, starting edge forward, so you might get Lemuelu versus Siwa Wong, which would be pretty amazing. Storm versus Raiders. The Storm, they are a top 4 team, I believe, right now. Correct. Raiders are 5th, but the Raiders, They're not very good defensively. And that sets up the Tigers game because the Tigers, like many teams, they were able to score points against the Raiders last week and make a contest of that game. So, like the Raiders, they are a team I can see like dropping out of the top 8. They're 5th right now. They should be in finals footy, but I can see them dropping out of top 8 because of their defense and how like just chaotic their conceding points is. They're playing the Storm this week. Storm have their usual crew, although Remus Smith and Alec McDonald are outside the top 17. Raiders have their usual crew. Big game for the Raiders. See what happens there. And then you've got Knights versus Bulldogs. I think the Bulldogs are still a mathematical chance. Knights are 7th. And Knights have got Leo Thompson, Greg Marzhew holding things down there. Leo Thompson's in excellent form. So those teams, basically from Raiders in 5th, and this is in order of their ladder placings, Raiders, Sharks, Knights, Rabbitohs, Eels, Cowboys, Sea Eagles, Roosters. That's the crux of the top 8 battle. Then you've also got Titans, Dolphins, Bulldogs, definitely not the Dragons, chasing finals footy. And there's a lot of interesting Kiwi-NRL stuff happening in those teams. Like, all those teams are battling for finals footy with significant Kiwi-NRL intrigue in their rosters, let alone what's happening at the top. Like the top 4 teams, Panthers, Broncos, Warriors, Storm, Kiwi-NRL powerhouses. Obviously the Warriors, they're from Aotearoa, but the Panthers, Broncos, and Storm, they are the upper echelon of Kiwi-NRL teams and organizations because they also have lots of Kiwi-NRL depth in their lower grades as well.
And they're the 4 teams that you can pretty safely say will make the top 8 from this point. I think Canberra will too, just by basis of the points already on the board. I think you're right in that they're going to, if you got a leaky defense come finals time, you're not going to last very long in the finals. Like this, it's just not going to happen. But they do have 30 points, and I think 30 points is probably around the buffer of where, like, if you get above that, you should make the 8. And they do have a potential defeat coming up against Melbourne this week. Like, that's a tough game for them. That's a game you could at least certainly envisage them losing, whether they do or not. They also still have to play the Broncos and the Sharks. They could easily lose all 3 of those. However, they do have a home game next week against the Bulldogs. And I think one win from those 4 games will probably keep the Raiders safe in the top 8 to some capacity. The other team I'd be quite worried about there with the big Kiwi core is the Parramatta Eels, because it's not just that they're slightly on the outside looking in. I mean, they're only 15 points differential mark off overtaken or catching up to South Sydney. It's the difference between 8th and 9th right now. But both those teams actually, and also North Queensland and 10th, still have a bye to come. So that's 2 points. So that's nice and convenient. But Parramatta's 3 games that they're playing are away to the Broncos, home to the Roosters, away to Penrith. So they have to play the 2 best teams, and also a Sydney team that's rather desperate right now, trying to overtake them. I think it's going to be tough for the Eels to get much more than just the 2 bye points there. Although if they do beat the Roosters, I think that's a big that's a huge boost in their hopes of getting there. And yeah, I mean, the Dragons and Tigers are mathematically out, as you say. Bulldogs not officially out, but they might be in a few days' time. They're on the fringes and realistically probably not going to get there. Don't think the Titans and Dolphins are going to get there either, with negative points differential not helping their cases. They're both on 22 points, so there's a 4-point buffer between them and the teams above. Relatively tough draws coming up for both of them to some extent as well. So there's a lot of water to go under that bridge yet, even though there's only 4 weeks to go. But that's what happens when you've got like 8 teams competing for about 4 places realistically there. And when that happens, it all change. It's going like that picture is going to change several times before the season is over. But as it stands, I you know, if I was going to pick one team from outside that eight that I think can sneak up there, I kind of still think that's the Roosters. And maybe I'm giving them too much credit for past exploits, but I kind of think the way things are shaping up for them, they will need a couple of big wins if they can. But Roosters finish with home to the Dolphins, away to the Eels, home to the Tigers, and then away to the Rabbitohs. So they could get on a roll and win all four of those, or they could do what the Roosters have been doing all season and be mad inconsistent and not win very many of those. In which case they don't have much of a show, but they can still get to 32 points if they win out. I think they're. I would pick them as the team from outside the eight that I think most likely to scoop up there. But as I say, like you can't ever predict much in the NRL.
And the Roosters are the heartiest Kiwi-NRL team in that mix. I think just their depth of Kiwi-NRL talent in the junior ranks, and like they've still got Brandon Smith, Joey Manu, Wairea Hargraves. Nofahu White has dropped out of the rotation. He must be injured because he was getting a lot of game time earlier in the season ahead of Wong, White and Wong, the great law firm. I think it's actually a restaurant in Auckland, White and Wong. So,
yeah.
But unfortunately for White, I think he must be out injured at the moment, and that has presented a lot of opportunities to Wong currently. Eels, ninth, are another Kiwi-NRL powerhouse. They've also got Tuti Huranui Twiddle from Turanga Waiwai, who was playing SG ball for the Eels earlier in the season. He is now their under-21s fullback, so watch out for him. He's pretty good. But they've got that concentration of Kiwi NRL talent in the NRL team that makes me want to support them as they try and do the impossible. Like, I think the Eels have definitely had like the worst draw. There's some stuff about them playing teams off the bye, all of that. Like, it's tough for them. They've also had that Dylan Brown situation. Let alone the regular weirdness of like, why don't Ofahiki Ogden, Makahisi Makatoa play every single game for the Eels? Haven't been able to solve that riddle this season. But they still have a little nice core of Kiwi NRL talent that makes me want to see them in finals footy. I want to see the Raiders in finals footy, but I mean, they have conceded the most points of the top 12 teams. So they're fifth, and they've got basically the worst defense of the top 12 teams. I want to see them in finals footy because of their Kiwi NRL talent. I don't know, to be honest, the Raiders could get into the finals and just dominate everyone and win the grand final. Like, that seems like what the Raiders do. Rabbitohs don't have a lot of Kiwi NRL talent. The Knights and Sharks have some interesting Kiwi NRL pockets. So as far as strictly Kiwi NRL funk goes, I want to see the Roosters and the Eels get into the top 8. Rabbitohs drop out. Maybe the Knights get in there. Yeah, there's one of those teams is going to have to miss out, and I don't know who. But the Rabbitohs have the least Kiwi NRL funk. So from a Kiwi NRL perspective, they can drop out, and then would hope to see the Eels or the Roosters get in there. Let's get into some Aotearoa footballing matters, and I just want to kind of pick your brain on a couple of Kiwi footballers we've seen pop up in recent days. First and not foremost, who is Oscar Oble Hall?
Oscar Oble Hall is a striker out of, I think, Christchurch, definitely the Canterbury region. He's been over in Denmark for a couple of years now. He was probably the highest profile player to miss out on the Under-20 World Cup squad when that went down a couple months ago. And he's been at a club called Esbjerg the whole time that he's been in Denmark. And when he first signed with them, I'm pretty sure they were a Superliga club, or they'd just been a Superliga club and maybe just been relegated. They've been relegated like twice since then. So they're now in the third tier of Danish football. But that's probably been a helpful thing for him in a funny way because they've given him a senior contract. It's relatively low key as far as these things. Like there's about 4 New Zealanders playing higher up than him on the Danish pyramid, but he's definitely one of them undercover dudes to keep a little at least learn the name so that when it pops up later down the line, so you might like recognize him and be like, ah, yeah, that dude, he's that young striker who's sort of been fizzing away in the background, working his way up youth teams at a European club like that. There's not that many. There's more Kiwi male forwards like goal scorers and creative players at European clubs than there are women, but there's still not exactly an abundance. Although few of the ones that there are been in pretty good form recently. I will just say that.
We've got Oscar Obel Hall. He seems to be from Christchurch. Did you say that?
Yeah, that's the one.
Love a bit of Christchurch footy, as we're also seeing a few more NRL players and basketballers from the Canterbury region as well. Also, a double banger from Ben Waine, goal scoring extraordinaire, playing for Plymouth Argyle. I assume that's the team who he joined after leaving the Wellington Phoenix. And EFL Cup, that is a lower league European Cup.
That's the League Cup. So the secondary cup, and like there's the FA Cup, and then there's the League Cup. This is the League Cup,
Right. So and Plymouth Argyle, I think they had a 2-0 win in their last game against Leyton Orient, and Ben Waine scored both goals. Was he starting striker? Was he coming off the bench? What was the story there? Either way, Ben Waine, goal scorer, he scored a double banger.
Yeah, starting striker, played I think 88 minutes, then got subbed off near the end. He could have had a hat trick. He had a couple other chances, I think less that he was missing them and more that like he actually had a goal disallowed for offside, and then I think there's another offside that was a little bit of a sneaky one. But that's what you want to see from a dude in Ben Wayne's position is you get an opportunity, just getting in nice spots and having chances is an important thing, whether you take them or not, is just to show that like you're capable. And then the finishing is something you can learn. The instincts to get there is not as easy to everything can be taught, but it's not as easy to have that. It's such a big boost when you're a dude who just knows how to be in the right place. And I think Ben Waine proved throughout his Phoenix time, and not just Phoenix, but, age grade stuff for the All Whites. He scored on debut for the All Whites too. There's that. Definitely when he was playing National League stuff for the Phoenix Reserves, same deal. Like he just scores goals wherever he goes. And he's already scored a few. I think he scored one goal as a sub in the league last year. Didn't play a whole lot in the league. He had a couple injuries, plus obviously he's a young player working his way in to a new team. So you're going to have to sort of earn those reps, and joining mid-season for a team that was already in good form, storming towards a title. It's not the easiest thing to get immediate minutes, but he did pretty well there. He scored in the EFL trophy. He scored in that game when he was given a start last year. They went all the way to the final of that. That EFL trophy is a cup below the League Cup. The League Cup still at least has Premier League teams in it, and usually a Premier League team that'll win it. But the EFL trophy is just for like League One and below. But he scored it in that opportunity. He always scored a lot of goals in the Aussie Cup as well. I think he just likes playing in cup football for some reason. He's pretty good in that atmosphere. But yeah, he got 5 minutes off the bench in their first game of the season because, of course, they've been promoted, Plymouth Argyle, to the Championship. So it's now second tier. And they actually surprised a few teams. Like I was looking at some of the previews and stuff leading in, not necessarily expecting Waine to get massive minutes or anything straight away there, but I was definitely pleasantly surprised to see him at least still featuring off the bench. But some of those previews and things, it's like Plymouth Argyle are not exactly being considered a team that's expected to be nice and safe in the mid-table or anything, having been promoted. They've got one of the lowest budgets, if not the lowest budget in the division. And I think most people sort of think that money equals success usually in football. So most people seem to think that they're likely to have a relegation battle on their hands. But they beat Huddersfield 3-1 in their first game. Huddersfield have been in the Premier League not that long ago. It was a big performance from them, a good result. Then they go into a League Cup game, rotate a couple of players, although it's still a fairly strong team. And Ben Waine probably by virtue of them only really having two centre forwards in the first team squad at the moment. That's definitely helping him. They are likely to sign another striker for that reason before the thing ends. But that's why Ben Waine knows that you got to strike while the iron's hot, right? So before they sign another striker, he needs to put his best case forward. How do you do that? League Cup midweek, when you get a rotated squad, here's your opportunity, score a couple goals, man of the match. There you go. Like, that's the perfect way to do that. And that's, that's exciting prospects for how Ben Waine's going to settle in, because I think from what we've seen from the first week, he's a more prominent figure than I thought he would be at this stage.
Joseph Champness.
Joey C.
He seems to have signed with a Turkish club, Adanaspor. What's his background from New Zealand, and how are you viewing his move to the Turkish league?
A little bit underwhelming, I will say. He's in a weird spot because if you remember Joey Champness, he was an Australian youth international. He's one of the dudes who switched allegiances to then play for the All Whites and looked all right in his first couple games. Not like a good dribbler, quite skillful in that way, but also, I don't know, he's had a very weird career, because when he was playing for Brisbane, or did he come back to Brisbane after? I can't remember, but he left the A-League at one point to move to America and have a year trying to be like a hip-hop musician, which is where the Joey C nickname comes in from. So he had that. He took a year off, like a sabbatical year off, to just be a musician. There is a music video hovering around there from Joey C on YouTube somewhere. JOWIC, if you all caps, if someone wants to go find that. He also went to Turkey off the back of the A-League and did all right there. Like, he had a few nice spots, but then he got in a weird situation where like their team just wasn't paying their players, and he got released, and a few others got released as sort of like a last straw kind of thing. They took the club to some kind, I don't know if they went to quarter, if it was some kind of like FIFA tribunal or something like that. But anyway, he got a big payout from that. Like, he got the back pay plus like what do you call it? Compensation, I guess. And then just didn't play football for like another year. It just didn't pop up at another club for ages. He was released at around like March 2022 or something like that. So he disappeared. He did pop up relatively recently doing some like exhibition tournament. It was just some weird like 7-a-side thing, which means nothing, but other than the fact that it was a rare sighting of him. And now he's signed with Adanaspor, I think it is, in Turkey, which is second tier in Turkey. The interesting, which is less really interesting and more just kind of tragic aspect of that club, is that they actually pulled out of the competition last year because they were in the region one of the regions that was affected when they had that big earthquake in Turkey and Syria. So they didn't even finish their season last year, but they were sort of given a free pass. Them, and they were probably going to be lower mid-table in the second tier. There was another team that also pulled out who were probably going to get relegated, but because they didn't finish their season, the league just sort of said, well, we'll protect your places, because obviously some things are bigger than football here, and this is one of them. So I don't really think it's the highest level he could have ended up at, but also when you haven't played for a year, you just kind of you take what's out there. Don't know that he'll be forcing his way back into All Whites contention off the back of playing second division in Turkey, unless he does something kind of special there, though.
No idea what you said in the last few minutes, because I was listening to a couple of tracks from
fair enough.
From Joey C. He's got a My Plan, which has some very attractive woman.
Yeah, that's
at a very nice house, and there's also the wedding photos, which is a bit more croony. Obviously nowadays a lot of auto tune, a lot of tough talk, and lovely ladies. Right. So shout out Joey C. Couple of big tracks, like they're getting plenty of views on YouTube. So he's obviously he's only got 2 tracks though, and he's back playing football. Interesting to see what happens there. Grace Neville, she is signed with London City, And there was also another move, Olivia Page. I have heard of Grace Neville before from your Flying Kiwi stuff, but I'm curious, who is Olivia Page? Looks like she's 18 years old and has signed with Sheffield United. So drop a couple of notes on Olivia Page and or Grace Neville, and then we'll finish by building out some Wellington Phoenix signings for their women's team as well.
Right. So Grace Neville was English dual national fullback who's played a few times for the football ferns in recent times. Like she has been called up. She was on the fringes of making the World Cup squad, didn't quite make the cut, but she's someone who is in that wider picture for the ferns. Quite a decent sort of fullback, can play wingback as well. Good pace, decent enough technically, which is showing the background she has of coming up through the English system. I think she was in the Arsenal academy when she was young, but more recently has played. I think she's re-signed with London City. This is second tier in England, but they were one of the best teams in the second tier last year. They actually ended up only 3 points off first, but only one team gets promoted, and they were back in third. There's another team in between them as well. So they're pretty good, but they've had an absolute tumultuous offseason where I think they only had 4 players under contract. They've changed their coach. They announced an assistant coach before they announced a new head coach, which was weird as. I don't know how that's supposed to work, but their biggest one was that all the players from last year's squad, so this would have included Grace Neville, signed a letter, like an open letter to the club, basically begging them to invest more money in the team or else they're just going to collapse. Because London City Lionesses used to be the Millwall women's team. But if you know the reputation of Millwall Football Club, they're, that's like hooligan central, and perhaps understandably from in that light, they didn't feel like they were getting a lot of support from the men's team, so they split off and just formed their own club, which makes them one of the rare clubs in the top couple divisions in England who doesn't have a men's team affiliate, which means that they don't have Premier League money being pumped into their women's team, which it's never enough. It's never as much Premier League money as it should be, but then the money that you do get from those Premier League affiliate men's teams tends to dwarf anything that a team like London City could produce on their own. So they've had some trouble, but they seem to have turned a corner, and they've been re-signing a lot of those players, and Grace Neville is one of them who's re-signed. So that's cool. And joining her in the England second tier is Ashley Ward, who played for Southampton last year, didn't play a lot, but she's also re-signed or been retained at least for Southampton. And now Olivia Page. And I've been waiting bated breath after the World Cup, probably still too soon after that to see too much of the ripples coming through, but just the transfer stuff that would happen with football ferns players off the back of that. Well, the first domino to fall has been a player who is coming off the under-17 World Cup last year. Like, not a football ferns player, but someone outside that circle, which is brilliant because that expands makes that circle a little bit bigger now. Olivia Page is from Eastern Suburbs. She played mostly as a wingback for them, can play a bit more attacking as well. But yeah, for Eastern Suburbs, mostly played as a wing-back. She did start, and I think she might have played the full game, in fact, in the grand final of the National League. She was in and out because they rotated their wing-backs, and she was also away at the Under-17 World Cup for a little while there. But yeah, good athlete. Like, she's quite tall. She's solid. She's going to win plenty of challenges. She can whip in a decent ball from the wing. Like, it's an exciting kind of signing because she's the type of player who that profile doesn't necessarily get the professional gig straight away, but she has. Like, she's just got a big boost over a bunch of players from that Under-17 World Cup who were just as good but haven't yet had that opportunity. So it's pretty cool. She's been trialing with Sheffield United, so this is something she's earned over a number of weeks of performances. And yeah, going to be looking out to see how much she does play in this first season with them, because Sheffield United is, again, like a relatively solid. They've been in the top flight before. They've been relegated from the top flight, but they have been a decent, like, they're one of the stronger women's football clubs in England. She won't be the first New Zealander to play for them. She actually won't even be the first New Zealander called Olivia to play for them, because Olivia Chance had only a short stint with Sheffield United. She played like a sort of 3-month spell in between like the start of the English season and the start of the A-League season when she went and played that year for Brisbane. Before she moved to Brisbane, she sort of like bided some time by playing a bit for Sheffield United. So Olivia Page just following on in Olivia Chance's footsteps. That's a pretty decent role model to be having if you're trying to make your way as a Kiwi pro.
And what have you made of some of these Wellington Phoenix women's signings that are coming pretty fast at the moment?
Yeah, the risk is that by the time this podcast comes out, there'll be two more. Like now, they've been churning through them, mostly just re-signing last year's squad, but I think they're up to 12 players. And let me just check what her name is. They've signed their first ever import, Hope Breslin, the first ever import, which comes with the news that apparently they now just don't have to worry about the quotas. Like they've been released from there. I thought that might happen. But you don't want to put too much faith in the Aussie Football Federations, given the New Zealand team, or any of these Aussie sporting federations, given the New Zealand team in their league, a nice little even playing field. That doesn't always happen. Case in point, COVID, like for the Breakers, for the Warriors, for the Phoenix, certainly wasn't entirely balanced there. But the first year, I think they had to sign I can't remember. I think it was 8. They might have had to sign 8 Australians in the first year. And the second year, they were like, well, let's just make it 5. This year, it seems they've got no restrictions, so they don't have to worry about that, which means instead of signing 5 Australians, they can use those spots to sign 5 visa players, and they don't have to come at the expense of the New Zealanders who make up the rest of the squad, which is great. That is fantastic. They might still sign a few Australians, we'll see, but they have released... well, the thing is, they kind of gamed the system last year anyway, because I think 3 of their 5 Australian players were actually New Zealanders who have dual citizenship. So they've retained Bree Edwards, their goalkeeper, who fit in that category, and Mickey Robertson as well was classed as an Australian player. Zoe Meakin was the other one who was born in Melbourne or something like that and probably never been back until she played for the Phoenix. But so it goes. As I say, gaming the system there by just signing New Zealanders to play as Australians. But the other 2 were Izzy Gomez and Claudia Chico, who are very much Aussies and have both left to go play elsewhere. I think Chico signed with Newcastle. I'm not sure what Gomez is up to, but probably will sign with another A-League club. Which means, yeah, that's cleared the path for Hope Breslin to come in. Hope Breslin, American, not centre forward. I was thinking they might sign they've been saying they're going to sign a centre forward, someone to score all their goals to put the chances away. Breslin is more of an attacking midfielder winger type, and she did play in the NWSL. She was drafted in there, played a few games last season. And played a few games this season, actually. She wasn't initially in a squad, but I think she got called up for, I think it was Houston when they lost a few players to the World Cup. She was signed as like a replacement player for that duration. But more notably, she played last year for Angel City FC, the team that Ellie Riley captains. So there is a Kiwi connection there that I'm sure Ellie Riley, maybe Agent Ellie, doing a little bit of work there for the Phoenix. But yeah, she's a winger. She's a creative midfielder. She's someone who can hopefully beat players one-on-one and get some stuff going against sort of structured defensive sets. As we know, the weakness of all of these Kiwi teams with Phoenixes and internationally. And I think as well, the fact she's not a striker tells you very clearly that they're not done with the import signings there either. There'll be at least 1 or 2 more to come, and one of them will be a centre forward, because we pretty much know they're going to sign a centre forward, or else if they weren't going to, don't think Millie Clegg would have left. But she has, which suggests that someone else is coming in to play big minutes in the position she wanted to play, which is fair enough. Like that, she's still in just as good a position where she is at Western Sydney, perhaps even better, so no dramas. But yeah, very interesting one in that this is the first one. They had signed Rebecca Lake from outside, but that's a Kiwi domestic player moving up. All their other players were just from last year's squad. So they're keeping mostly the core of that team, but you just add a little bit of extra international class around that, see if that can't take them to the next step, on top of also having a new coach in Paul Temple, something else that'll be a significant factor in how they fare. But yeah, the first 2 seasons they finished last, but you could see signs of progress throughout. I think the 3rd season very clearly seems to be the one where they're like, okay, well, no more like consolation prizes or anything. We are actually going to go all out and try and make the finals for the first time.
Beauty. Let's wrap it up there. That is the Niche Cast for this week. Make sure you're tuned in on Facebook and let us know how you're listening, whether it's via the podcast platforms or on YouTube. Sign up to the email newsletter. That's going to be a banger tomorrow. Check in with the Niche Cache and big up yourself. Love yourself. Kia kaha. Stay beautiful. A churcher.